It's been a very busy year, that goes without saying for Simon. And I think from having heard him speak a few times now, what I've most enjoyed is his incredibly compelling explanation of not just how, but why it's not negotiable that business and philanthropy go hand in hand. Won't you please give him a fantastic LV welcome, Simon McKeon.
Thanks very, very much, Tonya, for that very, very kind introduction. And anyone who knows me well knows actually that I'm not a tea or coffee drinker. I don't know why, I've just never been into hot drinks, not even soups. But over the last 1 or 2 years, I've actually become quite partial to iced coffee, you know, those things in plastic containers and things. And that's certainly kept me going this year. Gary Ringwood, his wife Deborah, can I thank you, Gary, for letting us into the big secret about Richard Dent. Richard is someone, I don't know if he's quite arrived yet, he's still doing his EW tipping board meeting, but Richard has been a giant in the disability sector. Any one of you who have worked in that sector or supported it in recent years, and it's having a very, very busy time at the moment pushing through with this National Disability Insurance Scheme, and Richard has given enormous energy to that, and it's an enormous coup, I think, that Leadership Victoria has scored him tonight. In fact, as I was on my way here, Richard's already sent out a little alert to the whole disability sector saying that he's leaving them and coming to Leadership Victoria, their loss, Leadership Victoria's gain. Having said all that, the theme for tonight, of course, is all about partnership, and one of the wonderful things about Leadership Victoria is how it partners two ways. It goes to the corporate sector, and we've just heard a wonderful list of thanks to some of the important corporate institutions in this part of the world, and how not only they support Leadership Victoria financially, but actually gain from their relationship with Leadership Victoria. But on the other hand, Leadership Victoria doesn't rest there. It extends also out to other sectors of society which aren't necessarily motivated by profit. And in so doing, of course, is in this wonderful place where it brings a number of different sectors together. In fact, I'm not sure that I can think of an organisation which so adeptly brings together the three great sectors continuously: government, business and the non-for-profit sector. Even wandering in here tonight, I'm sorry I've forgotten your name wherever you are, but I was reminded that you know, the Big Issue, one of the iconic community organisations which we embraced as such fabulous work with homeless, is the recipient of a wonderful partnership relationship with Leadership Victoria. Forgive me tonight if I appear a little distracted, because I really only flew in an hour or two ago, and for most of the last 3 or 4 days over the weekend, I've actually been in a remote indigenous community right out to the west of Alice Springs. And why am I distracted? Because, you know, in this amazing age where literally we can be a plane flight and several hours in a 4-wheel drive away from such a very, very different place, you know, the bringing together literally within half a day of the most diversely different cultures is extraordinary, and sometimes that stuff just doesn't leave you quickly. I want to say 1 or 2 things about that in a moment. I've been involved, I've been incredibly privileged to be chairman of CSIRO since the middle of last year, and one of the first things that CSIRO asked me to do was to speak to a group of CSIRO people. Now, CSIRO is an extraordinary scientific organisation, one that we ought to be very proud of as Australians. It excels in a large number of scientific disciplines, excels on the world stage. It has considerably more patents than any other organisation in this part of the world. It's invented everything from Wi-Fi to our polymer banknotes, from cyanide-free gold production, for those of you interested in that, through to Aerogard. Well, a few months ago, it received an extraordinary accolade from one of its global partners, Boeing, who appointed it the R&D Supplier of the Year against literally thousands of other R&D suppliers all around the world. And all of its science is produced by some of our nation's greatest scientists. But I wasn't talking to the scientists in CRO that day. I was actually talking to a relatively large group that work hard connecting the scientists with you and me, with the real world, the community that needs so much the science that is produced by CSIRO. Because CSIRO scientists, brilliant as they are, by themselves are actually little use to us. They actually need a very important group in the middle which connects them to the community. These are people who are good at commercial negotiations, lawyers, trademark patent people, communicators, PR experts, people who can conduct surveys, whatever it is that's required to actually take the science that's in the lab and make it of some relevance to us. And I said to them that whilst none of them were eligible for a Prime Minister's Science Prize, let alone a Nobel Science Prize, they were all incredibly important, and they really were. I meant that. Perhaps I'm biased because I'm not a scientist myself, and I can see only too well the importance of how they connect the science to the community. But it's interesting because, you know, when I think about an organisation like CSIRO, virtually everything it does is actually in partnership. And the theme tonight, partnership, is actually something that I don't think we think enough about. I love thinking about it because partnership is actually all about people. It's all about human relationships. It's all about, if you like, the soft and fuzzy side of making important things happen. Partnerships are inherently dependent on people with great people skills. And as I was trying to do with these CSIRO people, they should never, ever be undervalued. They may not be on a whole lot of honour roll boards, etc., but they're a vital part of what we do. If I was forced to bring out one aspect of leadership which I think is more important than the rest, I would struggle, but I would probably say it's leadership by example. There are many, many different aspects of leadership. Indeed, of course, we have, there are times for courageous leadership, or the time for the great speech. There's time for inclusive leadership, making sure that the next wave of leadership is coming through. There's a need for humble leadership, just stooping down. But it seems to me that it's leadership by example, which to me is particularly inspirational. In fact, it's interesting in that every now and then when I've been invited to be a part of a particular cause or an organisation or whatever, I've looked at the leadership, and if the leadership is one that truly leads by example, then typically I'm into it. In Tonia's introduction, she mentioned a little bit about the sailing. It's interesting in that, it's exhilarating, it's thrilling when we get the 100 things right at the same time that makes that boat go that fast. But most of the time when we're trialling it, trying to make it go fast, at least one thing goes wrong. And indeed, over the years, we have destroyed it many times. There's no manual on how to make a yacht go 50 knots or 100 kilometres per hour. And we were literally at the forefront of science much of the last 20 years. The program's actually been going since about 1993 when we first set a world record. And even though actually it's my name that actually gets in the record book, I'm the guy that steers it, in truth, and I've said this many times, I really am a relatively unimportant part of that program, because indeed it's not only the scientific brains behind it, but it's actually a couple of leaders in that syndicate who absolutely lead selflessly by example. I mentioned that we've crashed this boat many times, and it ends up being in 1,000 different bits and pieces, and it's naturally human to feel dispirited about that. But the two leaders of the organisation, they're always the ones that get up earliest and start to just methodically work through, trying to work out what was the component that broke first, what was the weak link in the chain. They're very, very prepared to roll up their sleeves, do the grungy jobs as well as the as the interesting ones. And as I said, across a range of different organisations, the ones that really inspire me in terms of leaders are those that can actually willingly stoop down and do the difficult jobs. I've given many talks this year, and I apologise for any of you who have heard me too often, but I've had many opportunities to talk to young people. And inevitably I get on to the issue of leadership. And what I've been saying to young people is that they may feel as if they're in a world that's surrounded by extraordinary competition to rise to the top, to be a leader, and I guess in one sense they're right. But I've also been saying to them that my own anecdotal observation is that there is always room for good leadership. The world doesn't have enough by way of good leaders. This year, whenever I've been speaking to business audiences, and I'm conscious that there are some in the room tonight from business, I've taken the opportunity to talk about something that I do feel strongly about. I'm not going to give a long lecture tonight, but the fact is that whilst business does all sorts of necessary things for society, the fact is that it's perennially on the nose. Survey after survey from the community says that business either isn't trusted or it's seen as not pulling its weight or indeed just despised. There are many reasons for that, but what I want to say is that really the world's foremost business academic, Michael Porter, has said business should actually take this seriously. It's not too hard to deal with it. He would say that indeed it's important for business to be seen as part of the solution, not seen as being in its own little corner, perennially asking for an optimal tax regime or a perfect IR regime. But the fact is that we as a community, the world itself, as we inexorably grow to 10 billion people, has no shortage of massive challenges. And Porter would say it's so important that the face of business appears to be genuinely interested in doing its bit. Now, it's all very well to say that in words. He's, of course, coined his own phrase called shared value, and others have coined different phrases as well. What they're all really saying, though, is the same thing, namely that business ought to appear and actually act with deep DNA commitment, if you like, to be part of the solution, just to find ways, not without in any way compromising its profit motive, but to connect with community and do a bit of that problem solving. Now, inevitably, to do that, it's important that business connects, partners with the non-for-profit sector. It's incapable, in many cases, of doing it itself. And one of the people who was out on this indigenous trip that I had over the weekend was Ben Lawrence, the HR partner of Wesfarmers. And he tells, Melbourne-based, and he tells a lovely story about what Coles has done over the last year or two. They surveyed all their employees a while back. And that's quite a task for them, almost 100,000 employees, and many of them young and casual, not necessarily feeling that connected to their business. And anyway, a whole lot of questions were asked of their employees. The biggest issue, the biggest gripe that Coles employees had in the supermarkets was that every night, literally tons of food was just turfed out and sent off to rubbish dumps. Now, Coles has been negotiating with municipal councils and rubbish dump owners for decades. There's no one better who negotiates the lowest cost of dumping food than Coles. And of course, the food itself is perfectly edible. It might have a little dimple or a little bruise on the occasional apple here and there, but because of our very high consumer standards, it's not saleable the next day. The employees found it dispiriting. They were just shifting these crate loads of food day after day after day, and they voted through this survey as saying and said if Coles management could just do something to deal with this problem, they would feel a whole lot better. Well, Coles did a pilot in a relatively small area, and there were two observations. The first was actually, yes, they could in fact very, very effectively give the food, sort it out a little bit into different bins, different types of food. There was certainly some food that did have to be dumped. and then give it to an organisation called Second Bite for putting out to the rest of the community, homeless refuges, etc., etc. But Coles was faced with a dilemma because actually, on a per unit cost, it was a little bit more than the deals that they'd done over the many years with dumping it just in the rubbish dumps. And the organisation then went back and tried to put a value on what the employee improved feeling was worth. And when they did that to the best of their ability, it became pretty obvious what they ought to do. And the good news was announced 2 or 3 months ago that Coles was now enlarging it way beyond a pilot program to 2 of our largest states. And it's a real program now. And just in 1 year, 5 million meals magically are produced. And a whole bunch of staff are feeling a whole lot better about their livelihoods. I don't think that we've seen the end of this sort of challenge that the modern manager is going to have to deal with. We're increasingly going to have to be analysing things, valuing things that are inherently difficult. The cost accountants, the narrow-minded ones, are going to be, frankly, less relevant when we come to really trying to work out what is right for business, let alone right for the community. But in keeping with this partnership theme tonight, Coles couldn't have gone anywhere without partnering with an organisation that was very motivated on trying to help Coles with this problem and actually, by all accounts, doing a really terrific job. If I was ready to say anything about leadership, though, I think that in this era, there is no one-size-fits-all leadership style. It's so important that I think the modern manager is adaptable, remains grounded, understands really what his constituency or whoever he or she is leading, that they can adapt to what is required at the time. And that's really hard for many of us that have a preferred leadership style and we get stuck in one mould and it's difficult to adapt. But the fact is that that is important. And I'm quite sure that our major organisations, whether in the non-for-profit sector, government or business, will increasingly be looking for flexible and adaptable leaders in the future. My real reason for being distracted tonight was that something actually quite profound happened over the weekend. The reason we went to Outback Australia was a small organisation called Red Dust Role Models, and it doesn't pretend to have a comprehensive solution to the plight of the indigenous at all, the closing the gap issue, not at all. But what it does, it's just one little bit of part of a big mosaic, and all it tries to do is to take wonderful role models, typically the sporting elite, and when we can organise the sporting elite outside of their busy, hectic seasons, in the off-season, to go out and spend some time with young Aboriginal kids, it is absolutely extraordinary the impact that can be had. It's not rocket science, it's just a matter of the role models understanding very clearly messages about nutrition and keeping away from sniffing petrol and going to school and looking after your bodies and respecting parents, etc. But when it comes out of their mouths, those kids really listen. And that was the main purpose of this session. We went to a community that Red Dust has been involved in now for many years, and we took a few rock stars, James Hird and Dyson Heppel from Essendon, Tom Lonergan and Jimmy Bartels from Geelong, even Eddie Maguire came along. So, there were some celebrities there. And they did all their work with the local community really well. But something interesting happened on the night, on Saturday night. We were actually sleeping a couple of kilometres, just under the stars in Swags, a couple of kilometres away from the community in an area that had been selected, if you like. So the local community were quite happy that we were there. We weren't interfering with any of their sensitive culture, etc., etc. And we invited the community, about 200 people from the town, to come out and actually have a meal with us. So it was, a pretty big exercise putting all of that on. And in return, they were going to put on a little bit of dancing for us. We knew that the young kids would do some stuff, and perhaps some of the young males in particular. And that all went okay, although we knew early on something different was happening, because normally we would have expected and catered for about half of that community. They all came that night, and we weren't quite sure why. And then it got very interesting later on because we had a succession of dancing, starting with the tiny little kids, boys and girls, and then getting to the adolescents and then some of the young males. But then something happened which had not happened before. The older women started what we call painting up in the background. They just sat in a huddle. They were literally painting each other. And they took a long time to do it, and we were actually just sort of sitting there twiddling our thumbs, not really sure what to do, but we kind of all sensed that it was important. Anyway, they then put on their own dance, and indeed some of the older men joined in it as well. We kind of sensed that it was significant, but we weren't really sure what was happening. It wasn't until the next morning that we were told precisely what had happened. And we still perhaps don't know the entire story, but all we know is that the dance that we observed that night had not been danced for a long, long time, not even within their own community. And this is not a community that is open to the world. If you happen to end up on the wrong road and wander in there in your four-wheel drive, you'll be politely told that you're lost and sent on your way. But they had struggled themselves to hand down their traditions to their younger people. And what happened that night was very special because we witnessed something which not only had not occurred for a long time, but not even within their own community. And as I was quietly asking around the Red Dust leaders themselves what might have caused this, I guess one or two things came out, and that was that the Red Dust leadership has this amazing knack of connecting with the rock stars of our society. It also has an amazing knack of connecting with, some would say, a primitive culture, people living a very, very different life as well. And then it has this amazing knack of somehow bringing the two together. And on top of that, I think, played possibly a small role in this particularly significant event that occurred the other night. They're in a very demanding place, this little leadership team. They're not well known. Indeed, the celebrities that were there that week, over the weekend, were not leading anything. They were there to be led, if you like, by this extraordinary team. And over the years, I guess they've faced all sorts of issues about going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes they've been let down by the community, having arranged a huge week of activities, to be told a few days out it's not going to happen. And they're not really told the reason why. So it's often very slow progress. But every now and then, something miraculous happens, which happened the other night. And the true leadership style there was one that was extraordinarily reverential, respectful to the great challenge that that really all of us have in trying to spend a moment or two every now and then as to what we do with our Indigenous folk. I've simply used that example because I think it is, for us Australians, such a hard one. We can insulate ourselves away from the Indigenous challenge so easily. It's kind of over there. But the reality is it's just one of many challenges we have in this society. Each and every one of us can do something about it. Each and every one of our organisations, our commercial organisations, can find somewhere where it's right for them to connect without compromising profit in any significant way. But what I'm really saying is that when it comes to leadership, some of this really, really hard stuff is where, in my opinion, the truly great leaders need to come forward. They're not always loud, they're not always the greatest orators, they're not always seen as courageous, but they're incredibly effective. And when we allow true partnership to happen, led by these sorts of effective leaders, then truly remarkable things can happen. Thank you.